We've got 4. Great. Well, good morning or good whatever today is. Hello. Clerk, will you go ahead and call the roll?
Agents. Clegg.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Willits. Whittings.
Here.
5 present, 1 absent.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and jump right in. Alex, welcome. Alex is going to go over some cybersecurity.
I am. Thank you very
I'm
much.
just going to say update.
Sorry, Madam Mayor.
I don't know what to call it beyond an update.
Cybersecurity update's fine. Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Alex Winkler. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the City of Boise. And several weeks ago, I was informed that there were some questions at Council about cybersecurity as related to a single line item on the budget ask. And the question was asked, what do we do for that at the city? And that's why we're here at work session to talk about what is our program here at the city and answer any questions that the City Council might have. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce David Randall. He's our enterprise architect and cybersecurity senior manager, and he's here to talk to us about our posture and what we do here. So.
Thanks, Alex. Madam Mayor, council members, thank you very much for having us here today to talk about our cybersecurity program. It's something that obviously is of interest to you as from my perspective, it should be. So it's a good opportunity. I've been in the IT business for about 35 years, the last 20 in enterprise architecture and cybersecurity. I've been with the city for about 2.5 years, and I have the privilege of working with 2 exceptional cybersecurity professionals, Nick Phillips and Hojat Khosrovi. The 3 of us comprise your cybersecurity team. So anyway, if you have any really hard answers, they're the experts to go to. I want to start off by just defining what we mean when we say cybersecurity, and then we'll jump into sort of what our goals are, what our challenges are, what we've been up to for the last year or so, and then what our plans are going forward, just to give you a sense of where we are and where we're headed. You can see the formal definition of cybersecurity on the screen. And basically what it says is cybersecurity is about keeping the bad guys away, but making sure that that our people who need access to the information that we're trying to protect do. And this really distills down to a familiar three-letter acronym, but in a different context, CIA, which refers not to the infamous agency in Washington, D.C., but is an acronym that stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And all 3 of those things are required for an effective cybersecurity program. The confidentiality is obvious. We want to keep our information, especially sensitive information, out of the hands of people who shouldn't have it. The integrity means we want to keep the information in a good state, high quality information that's correct and free from any kind of corruption. And then the availability is sort of what you might think is the converse of what a cybersecurity guy would be talking about. Basically, that means the information needs to be available to the people who need it when and where they need access to it. There is some tension between the availability objective and the confidentiality objective, and that's why we're employed, frankly. So anyway, that's really what the essence of what cybersecurity is about. Our goals are premised on a security framework that the National Institute of Science and Technology has defined, and basically they called out 5 major buckets of things that an effective cybersecurity program needs to deliver. As you see there, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Identify just means we need to understand what the threats and risks are that we need to be prepared for. Protect means we should put in place whatever safeguards we can to defend against those threats and risks. Detect means in the eventuality that in spite of the safeguards that we put in place, something bad happens, that we can identify that in fact that is happening quickly to enable timely response. Respond is the next thing. When something bad happens, we want to go stop it and fix it. And then recover is if information has become corrupted or lost, we want to get back to a known good state. So you'll see as we go through this, the rest of this presentation, that those 5 areas really constitute the major themes for our cybersecurity program. The problem is that threats can come from a lot of different places and in many different forms. The 3 major things that we're concerned about these days are what you see here: phishing, ransomware, and hacktivism. Phishing, you're all familiar with it, the email that purports to be from your bank or some other authority, but it's not. It's from some disreputable individual that's trying to tease your account information or other sensitive information from you. Ransomware is the bad guys who come and either encrypt your data so you don't have access to it, or capture sensitive data that you might not want to have publicly disclosed, and then ask you for money in return for not disclosing the data or returning your access. And then hacktivism is just people who are committing cyber crimes to make a political statement or to advance a particular cause. So they may not have a financial motive, but they still are using it to try to send a message. And these 3 primary types of threats can come in through a variety of avenues. People are one of our biggest threats, and that's why we maintain an active security awareness program to make sure that security remains in the forefront of people's minds as they go through their daily work. The ransomware attacks are becoming increasingly sophisticated with every passing day. We've seen that over the last couple of years. They've been advancing both in frequency and severity, and in some cases, they are amazingly complex and it's extended over time to the point that it can often be very difficult to identify that's happening until it's too late. The advent of the hybrid workforce, and this was really accelerated, as you all know, by our COVID experience over the last couple of years. The notion that workers are no longer securely ensconced within the city network and the protections that it affords, they're now working from wherever they might be: home, Starbucks, a hotel room, on an airplane. So that mobility, that notion that they can be on a network that we no longer control adds potential risk as well. Obsolete, unpatched systems are a big challenge. Software is somewhat ephemeral. The bad guys are finding vulnerabilities in software every day. You've seen it at home that there's weekly Windows updates and updates to other software products. The bad guys are really good at uncovering the vulnerabilities. Software vendors are pretty good at coming up with fixes to them, but the fixes don't work unless they get installed. And keeping track of that across the 500 and some applications in use across the city is a daunting task. Vendor vulnerabilities as well. We saw an attack last year on a company called SolarWinds, who's a software vendor, and the bad guys had actually infected the software image that SolarWinds distributed to their customers, we're one of them, as the install image to install their software on premise. So by infecting that one company, the bad guys were able to extend their tendrils out to hundreds of other companies and have the compromises there. So we're looking much more seriously now as we consider new solutions that we might want to bring into the city. We're looking at the vendor security controls and their development processes to make sure that we're not accepting any additional risk by using their software. And then the final one, and this one's huge, is the state-sponsored actors. Because it's no longer, Johnny sitting in his parents' basement just trying to make mischief. These are well-funded, well-trained, and focused teams, often all working toward a common goal that are supported by governments, notably Russia, China, North Korea, all have very active cyber attack programs in place. And so, you know, it's not just watching out for the mischievous user, it's focused attacks trying to achieve any number of different directives. So a lot of things that frankly keep me up at night. And this is just a summary of some of the recent attacks over the last year. This is I think it's kind of a creative way to do it. It's a bubble chart where the size of the bubble represents the number of accounts potentially compromised. So the bigger bubbles were obviously the more significant attacks. What strikes me more significantly, though, in this diagram is all the little bubbles, and there's lots of them. And these are things that we often don't hear anything about, but they're happening all the time. And the little screen clip down at the bottom from Idaho News, just reflecting on the Valley Regional Transit ransomware attack recently. I just brought that up because this is starting to come home. Industry analysts are now noting that state and local governments are increasingly becoming targets of attack where we weren't such attractive targets in the past. But you know, I think the bad guys are realizing that, you know, there is benefit to be made by, you know, coming after cities like us. So again, we just need to be on our toes with all this stuff. So what do we do about it? We engage a company called Infotech. They're an industry analysis firm, and they published a research piece that recommended these 5 items as the cybersecurity priorities for 2022. Number 1 was acquiring and retaining talent. Well, we're in good shape there. Number 2, securing a remote workforce, absolutely relevant for us. Because of what I said before, the advent of the hybrid workforce and the notion that we have people working from wherever they might be is, you know, adds a new dimension to the protections that we need to put in place. Securing digital transformation. So as we introduce new solutions into the city, we have now added a technical questionnaire, including a series of security-centric questions that we include as a part of every RFP, RFI that we send out to vendors, and insist that they answer sort of what their security posture is, so that we can be sure that as we bring in new solutions into the city, we're doing so in a secure way. Adopting zero trust. Zero trust is an industry sort of a buzz term that's really become in vogue over the past few years. Basically what it means is defense in depth. Never trust that the person is who they actually say they are. So it's authenticate everywhere. That may happen sort of invisibly behind the scenes. It's not that you're necessarily going to be presented with a dialogue and have to type in your password every time. But it does mean that that authentication does need to take place so that regardless of which application or which data you're trying to access, we have a high degree of confidence that you are in fact who you assert you are. And then the final thing is protecting against and responding to ransomware. And that's kind of what we talked about before. It's just maintaining awareness of what's going on, having in place the pieces necessary to detect when an attack may be happening, and then being prepared to defend against that. So here's what we've been up to lately. This represents stuff that the major things that we've accomplished over the last year or so. In terms of maintaining employee awareness, we do monthly phishing tests. Our employees love those. And we've updated the awareness training just to keep it fresh. Last year, we partnered with the risk management team to make sure that we could continue our cybersecurity insurance, and we were able to secure that in a relatively affordable agreement. To further secure some critical elements of our data center infrastructure, we applied multi-factor authentication to accessing those servers to, again, provide a higher degree of confidence that people, and especially the people accessing these, typically have broad-ranging administrator access, a higher degree of confidence that they are in fact who they assert they are. We did a cybersecurity tabletop exercise last year involving the IT leadership team, where we sat down in a room and ran the team through a simulated cybersecurity event from initial detection all the way through response and recovery. It was hugely informative for us as a security team, for the IT leadership team as well. We are planning on doing another one of those this year as well. Penetration testing, we've now done that 2 years in a row, where we engage a third party to basically be a simulated bad guy and give them the keys into our network and ask them to, do what they can, see how much damage they potentially could do in a non-destructive way. That's been very informative as well. And then literally as we speak, we're rolling out an improved endpoint security system. It's basically a virus scanner, but has a lot of additional capabilities that will give us a much better ability to maintain awareness of what's happening on laptops, desktops, servers, and so on. And so here's what's coming next. The top 3 things here represent projects that we requested funding for fiscal 23. In the identify space, I talked about the need for effective patch management earlier. We're looking to bring on board a solution that can track patch availability and application across not just the Microsoft suite, which we can do pretty well right now, but across as many vendors as we can include in that. In the protect space, cloud-based web filtering, the web filter we have currently only works if you're sitting on the city network. If you're working from home, it's not there. So there are web-based or cloud-based solutions that are effective regardless of how you're connected to the network. And so we think that's an important step forward as well. And then in the detect space, engaging a service provider to provide 24/7 security event monitoring, something that we can't do currently given the level of staffing that we have. And that will dramatically improve the speed with which we can identify that something bad may be happening and then in turn respond quickly as well. I mentioned earlier, we're going to do a repeat of the tabletop exercise, different scenario this year. We're targeting the June timeframe to get that done, and we're going to expand the participant audience to include not just IT, but legal, CE, risk management as well to expand the fold there. And then recovery, as we go through that exercise, we will be applying our existing incident response plan and taking notes. What, is the plan on point? Does it task us with the things we need to do, or are there improvements we need to make? And then we'll go ahead and roll those in. And that's all I got. Comments, questions, welcome.
Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for that presentation. I have a specific question about recovery if ransomware does happen. At my last place of employment, we did suffer that, and it is my belief that they ended up paying off the ransom. I'm wondering, do we have a policy here of how we respond to ransomware if that were to happen, if we were to have our system taken over, our files taken over and held from us? What is it that we would do?
The first thing we do is really just sort of assess the situation and, how severe is it? And do we have a recovery option that would allow us to avoid paying the ransom? We'd also be engaging with our insurer and securing their advice. They have breach coaches that they can bring to bear, folks who have experience responding to these kinds of things and can formulate a detailed action plan for how to proceed. I think.
Yeah, that's pretty much, we would follow their lead.
Madam Mayor, just a follow-up. So is part of that insurance, if it came to it, would that insurance pay that?
There are
came
some
down to
things
it?
that staff aren't able to answer, given they look to the experts and our insurers for direction.
But we'll be happy to follow up with you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, question. Thank you, first of all.
I can see why this keeps you up at night. This is stressing me out when I think about all of these things. I had a question, and it's in regard to basically global cyber attacks. And, and you mentioned that now foreign governments are involved in this. And I think we see that in the news. I'm curious, and if this is something that you need to get back to me on, I understand. When something like that happens or is suspected, what role do our partners in the federal government play in making sure that we're all protected against that?
So, yeah, good question. There is an organization called CISA, the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's part of Homeland Security. We have a strong partnership with those guys. We talk to them on almost a daily basis. And they're keeping their finger on the pulse of exactly those kinds of things. You know, what are the major sort of emerging threats that they're seeing, and they're plugged into, obviously, lots of different organizations at, you know, the federal, state, and local level as well. So they have really good visibility into what's going on. So that's one of our primary sources. We also stay plugged into other, you know, third-party sites. Krebs on Security is a great resource for just sort of tracking what's happening in the cyberspace world. So there's lots of different resources that we plug into. It's what occupies a lot of their time, quite frankly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
like Council Member Willits, thank you for the work that you do. There's a lot of things that keep me up at night. This currently isn't one of them. So I have faith that you're doing that for us. I'm curious, as far as looking further into the future, we approved something for this last interim budget change. I'm wondering if there's things that are telling us that 5 years down the road, several years down the road, that this is areas where there's significant investments that need to be made, if they're gradual, if there's any idea of what the future might look for us in investments in this area.
It's a valid question, one that I desperately wish I had a good answer to. It's a very dynamic environment. It's changing every day. The bad guys are getting increasingly more sophisticated. They're finding creative ways to wreak their havoc. We're doing our best to keep up with them. I think that the likelihood, to be very candid, I think the likelihood of continued investment requirements is probably gonna be needed just to be able to stay up with the evolving threats. But it's really hard to look into a crystal ball out very far and make any predictions that, you know, it's just pure guesswork at this point.
Madam Mayor, thank you for the presentation. It's, I think anyone who's kind of been high up in an organization is always like, oh, remember that one time that we had this happen or that happen, or someone got phished and ended up buying $1,000 worth of Walmart gift cards for a scammer somewhere. So I know that this is an ongoing thing. As these get more complex and have greater resource needs in the cybersecurity realm, I know that at the state level, the Office of the Controller, Brandon Wolf, has been really active in cybersecurity. Is there any opportunity for collaboration on a little bit broader scale as we all kind of like navigate this really complicated mess together?
Oh, absolutely. And we try to maintain, you know, sort of an ongoing dialogue with our counterparts at the state, in Meridian, Ada County, just to, forgive me, I'm losing my voice. Just to make sure we're all on the same page and that we're all aware of what one another are looking at and concerned about and worried about. And that's all very helpful. And you know, you can't have too many avenues of information because everybody's got a slightly different perspective. And, you know, somebody you talk to might have an observation that just triggers, you know, a realization of, oh, we should be doing that too. So, yeah.
That's great. I think that one of the things that we learn with these really complex issues is that the more collaboration and the more kind of pool of knowledge that exists, the better off we all are. So it's encouraging to hear that that already exists. I'm not surprised at all,
Yeah,
but I think it's great.
thanks. I mentioned CISA before, and they're a great forum for that kind of information exchange as well. There's another organization called MSISAC, which is multi-state information sharing and collaboration. So it's literally what you're talking about, but formalized as an online organization. And in fact, we're sending these guys to a conference in a couple of months, sponsored by that organization. So there's lots of resources out there. Yeah.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. So my question is just a request that as the budget comes forward, we're really transparent with our constituents about the cost of this. I am really glad you're doing it. It sounds like you're doing the things that we need done. As I get tagged with, increasing budgets all the time, I think it's really important to be really transparent and honest with citizens that, hey, if you want this to be a safe workplace, a safe way, your information here to be safe, these are the things we have to do, and this is how much it costs.
Thanks.
Madam Mayor, I just want to echo that. That is such a great point because no one wants their data stolen. I mean, there's a cottage industry of folks who are stealing identities, and we hold a lot of constituent data here. So I think that's an amazing point. I mean, there's a cost to this, and it's not just, someone in their basement doing this anymore. These are very sophisticated players who have a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of government support. So I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah,
To be clear,
I absolutely
The hackers
applaud.
don't have our government support. They have other government supports.
Yes, let's hope not. Yeah. Thank you. Foreign governments, let's be clear.
Yeah, I understand completely. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for being here and the rest of the team for all that you do to keep our data safe. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Okay, now we're going to be talking about 8th Street accessibility and mobility. Sean Keeley will kick us off, and then we've got Don. I want to say Kostelek, but am I Kostelek? Okay, to join in the discussion as well. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Delighted to be here today. Sean Keithley, Director of Economic Development here with the Mayor's Office, and proud to be joined by Don Kostelek, representing Vitruvian Planning, as well as our extended consulting team, including the Idaho Access Project and CSHQA in an advisory role on this project. And so what we'd like to talk to you today about some of the recent work that we've been doing on 8th Street, as well as to give an overview, since it's been a while, on the last 2 years of our efforts surrounding 8th Street and the city's involvement in that. So a little bit of background. Over the past 2 years, it's hard to believe it's been that long, but this council created the opportunity to create what we call an open street. Really, it's closed to vehicular traffic, but an open street on 8th Street for the use of pedestrians and non-motorized traffic. And initially, this was kicked off as a pilot project in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, in order to provide the opportunity for businesses along 8th, and part of that broader effort that we had as a city to provide opportunities for businesses with patios to give safe spaces for their patrons outside, an opportunity to patronize these businesses and sort of fast track the opportunity to economic recovery as they emerge from the pandemic. I'm proud to say that this has been a well-received project broadly across our community by both businesses and the public. And we really have an opportunity here today to look at over the course of that 2 years of the pilot project, some of the lessons learned, as well as some of the opportunities for improvements going forward, and to consider the the future of 8th Street in a holistic way with a focus on the sort of the primary objectives, the first phase objectives as we look at how this might, how the street might evolve in the future, and focus on accessibility and mobility as a primary part of that. A big piece of the project since its inception has been consistent and really continuous stakeholder engagement. And that being a community-driven project has unveiled some great opportunities for improvement. And in the past 3 months, with the assistance of our partners here with Vitruvian and the extended consultant team, to focus in on what those can really look like on that mobility and accessibility standpoint. So what does some of that engagement look like? Well, it's been multiple stakeholder group meetings, one-on-one consultations, a lot of casual conversations along 8th Street, and site visits, particularly in the past 3 months, site visits in inclement weather that I'm grateful for our consultant team and community to have been a part of, considering what some of that looked like. But the engagement has gone across the community and really represented a broad spectrum of folks who've been involved in this. And that's everyone from the business community along 8th Street and the extended area in the vicinity of 8th, as well as businesses that are engaged in 8th Street in other ways, like delivery companies and businesses that interact with those retail and restaurant establishments there. It's also been strongly represented by our vision and mobility impaired community. And that includes a number of diverse subgroups and groups that have been represented as part of the greater effort in the City of Boise's cross disability task force. We've also engaged our bike and pedestrian advocate organizations, partner agencies, including CCDC, DBA, and of course, ACHD, and a number of design and construction professionals who've given their time to be a part of this project and deliver their insights as to some of the best practices and opportunities that can be moved forward to make it more accessible for everyone in our community. And then, of course, a number of groups across our internal city organization, including emergency services, clerk's office, planning and development services, and community engagement, to name a few. So what we've heard has really been about balancing needs and trade-offs. And all of these needs are not mutually exclusive. They relate to each other in one way or another. And that's part of the idea behind this project being sort of a holistic look at how we can approach the future of 8th Street. Of course, primary among those needs are accessibility and safety for all users. And as part of that, directly linked to it are things like aesthetics and reduction in the street clutter is something that will help to make this street ultimately a more accessible and an enjoyable street for everybody. Also, the public and private space question, the need for certainty around that, something that our businesses have asked us for, and something that, again, relates to the accessibility and design considerations for the street as well. Deliveries and parking continue to be something that been raised as a need for certainty around that, but also something that we have addressed along the way, and with good cooperation from our folks in our organization, particularly the clerk's office, have found ways to address that and meet the needs of our businesses along 8th without the need for parking right in front of those businesses. Emergency access, of course, another big piece of that, and related to it, the ability to carry on special events and street activation on 8th Street in a configuration as it is now or in the future with some modifications. Of course, the functionality of 8th Street as a corridor, a big piece of this. When I talk about 8th Street in this context, of course, we're talking about the 2 blocks in between Bannock and Main. Really, 8th Street, of course, is a corridor that extends from the river to the foothills, and understanding how it functions, how the city-owned portion functions in the context of that is critical in whatever we do in the future. And then finally, things like ongoing maintenance and leveraging the public improvements that have made 8th Street over the years are considerations that we've heard from folks as critical to the whatever modifications that we end up making to the street in the future. So The current effort that we have engaged our consulting team to be a part of has again focused primarily on the accessibility, mobility priorities, and some of the treatments that can improve that for all users of the street in our community. A big piece of that has been continuing the public outreach that we've been doing for the past couple of years, and really focusing in on users of the street, particularly those with visual and mobility impairments, and a wide variety of other groups within that. Again, big credit to folks in our community engagement team who have been working with Cross Disability Task Force to support that as well. But we're really focusing on this in this effort is intentional and collaborative efforts that will identify future improvements in a way that will benefit all users. At the end of the day, we have looked at this again as a holistic approach and see this as something that will complement 8th Street as a vibrant public space and continue to create it as a place that supports vibrant economic development and a supportive business environment as well. That's a critical piece of whatever direction we hope to receive on this. So moving along, I'll just use this as a transition to Don Kostelek here from the consulting team. Again, he has been working closely with other partners on this, particularly Idaho Access Project and CSHQA, which has been involved in advisory, unpaid role, but has certainly added a lot in terms of design perspective to this project. Don will share with you several design concepts that have come out of this work that focus on this idea of creating a street for everyone. Most of these options involve 8th Street in its current configuration as a closed to vehicular traffic street, open street, so to speak. And then we'll look for additional feedback from leadership in terms of preferred direction based upon some of the feedback that we've received from our community. Following that, we are happy to and stand ready to take next steps to move forward with an engineering consultant and further work with our partners at ACHD and other agencies. With that, I will hand it off to Don for an overview of some of the work that we've been doing over the past 3 months.
Thanks, Sean. Again, Don Kostelek with Vitruvian Planning. It's good to see those of you as a group in this chamber, and thanks to Andrea and Sierra and Sean for the work they've done in rounding up internal and external stakeholders on this. The challenge we're faced with those 2 blocks of 8th Street is something that doesn't exist very much in the transportation world. And so coming up and identifying here's federal guideline X that helps us fit this and we think we can do it is just not something in the cards. So if we think about 8th Street as it currently exists in those 2 blocks and the way it's been during COVID, we kind of have this hybrid of what we might call a shared street, which is typical, a very low speed environment where pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists use that space, and the motorists are treated as guests in that space from a design standpoint. We also have things like the Greenbelt, which would be a shared use pathway that is meant for recreational and transportation uses, bicyclist and pedestrian only, but we don't have the same types of frequent doors and access points and dining, especially on both sides of that. And even if we think of these 2 blocks as something like the Grove Plaza, we have much more intensive uses, much more frequent uses, whereas at least the majority of the Grove Plaza and its uses tend to be event-based. We do have some activities on the north side of that. So those were kind of the collective challenges we were facing with. I play a game when I'm biking up 8th Street to see how far away I can see the orange barricades. It's kind of like seeing the Great Wall of China from space kind of thing. And that's what everybody's question is, when can the orange barricades go away? The reason the orange barricades are there is because of a person with a vision disability, if they were not there, could be walking down the center of 8th Street in its current configuration, miss the bollards, and get into the street without having the benefit of detectable warnings or other features in the design to tell them they're entering that risk area. So one of our first priorities was to identify the types of things that would have to happen at the street crossings of Maine and Idaho and Bannock to some degree to make sure the detectability was there. if you see the yellow pads at a curb ramp out there, those are generally called detectable warning surfaces or truncated domes. And those are to provide both the vision contrast as well as the bumps provide a tactile to somebody who is blind or vision impaired and can identify that they are leaving the safe area of a sidewalk or pathway and entering a more risky area of the street. And because that transition does not have those, that's why the barricades are there. So to remedy that issue, and we have buy-in from ACHD, essentially putting truncated domes across the full width of what would be the former street crossing is essentially the baseline improvement that would go in there to meet that. I will detail some other pieces of that. And then we have within the blocks themselves, accessibility issues related to protruding objects and lack of consistent lines due to what was done and done from a pretty good standpoint, I would say, from what I've seen from other similar COVID streets, things like the temporary ramps and bike parking and other things. So our other goal was to provide clean lines for people, but that also can pose other challenges. So that's the preface that we're starting from on this. Just kind of an overview and what's happening. Certainly the North Block, the Idaho to Bannock, it really the full sidewalk space is almost is 100% consumed by the patios that were there, primarily due to the prevalence of the restaurant uses. The South Block is a little more random because of different retail establishments. Jurisdictionally, here's what we're talking about. Essentially, the city-owned piece is the rectangle that runs between the building faces on 8th Street. But the moment you get to the building faces that front on Idaho or Maine, that's ACHD. So those jurisdictionally are what we are dealing with. And here's another angle. From an aerial standpoint, if you look at an east-west street like that, a magenta being Idaho, Maine, or Bannock, that would be ACHDs. And the interior of the blocks are the city of Boise. So from a jurisdictional standpoint, that's where we have to make sure things match up. Challenges for people with disabilities. The ramps, for example, I think are better than most I've seen, but there are still some challenges even from like a turning radius standpoint for a person in a wheelchair. If someone is blind or vision impaired and they're walking down the middle of 8th Street, there's no cues to tell them that they have an access point or a ramp to either one of their sides. We did hear from people from the blind community that they just don't see downtown as theirs anymore because of the types of things they come across on both existing sidewalks with sidewalk dining and 8th Street. So we were really presented with our own challenge to how to address that. The other thing that happens is somebody walking with a guide dog, the guide dog still sees 8th Street as a street and they're taught to avoid a street. And literally watching those with a guide dog veer off the street at the first chance that they could. And so a goal in the design of this is to make it not look like a street because we have that basic confusion. And their concern is if they learn to go up 8th Street and it looks like a street, what happens when they try to cross something like Broadway or Vista, where it actually is a street, and they don't want to confuse the dog. Business and street access, obviously the South Block, there's no alley for trash services and other features, so that will always need to be opened at certain times of day. Those are morning hours that it's done. The crossings, I'll get at the issues with detectability there, and obviously consistency and treatment for people with disabilities. There are still going to need to be certain types of vehicular uses on the street, but it's very minimal, very sporadic. The stuff that's outside of the normal times for delivery are things like in the top image, people that are loading and offloading office furniture from buildings, for example. And of course, the Union Block Alley and Freak Alley still have some delivery services and things going on there. So as I said, if we think of it first as a shared use pathway, we think of pedestrians, people with mobility devices, bicyclists, scooters, and others. And that's where the challenge comes in, especially from a speed standpoint when you're out on 8th Street. If you're there at a high volume time, it's pretty impossible to move quickly through there, although some people may wish to treat it like a slalom course on a wheeled device. The concern we heard is more about when it's empty. And there might be a single person walking out on the street, and if they have a vision disability, they really feel like they're getting buzzed by the bicyclists that are traveling or the scooter users that are traveling at a higher rate of speed. The top image here shows something that does happen and creates additional conflict because of the barricades, because the bicyclists are also forced to use the narrow crosswalks and curb ramps. And so it's the conflicts at the intersections. By putting the truncated domes there, getting rid of the barricades will satisfy that. But there's still some concern from people with disabilities over the safety of it, because unlike a shared use pathway like the Greenbelt, they're coming out of a restaurant, they're coming onto the street, trying to orient themselves to go one way or another. And there's through movements occurring by people going 12 to 15 or so miles an hour on those wheeled devices. So from a design concept standpoint, excuse me.
Just on that
Sorry,
last
Jimmy.
slide, quick question there. So just to make sure that I'm understanding, can we go back one slide? So on our bottom picture there, we've got a lot of people walking in a green painted bike lane, right?
Yes.
And so somebody who is visually impaired might be walking, and if they're on the street instead of on the sidewalk, they have no idea if they're walking down the middle of the street or if they're walking down the green path. Those people aren't, I'm assuming, aren't visually impaired. They just happen to be walking there. But what you're saying is that if you were visually impaired and you're on the street, you really have no idea whether you're walking right down the middle or if you are walking in the designated bike lane. Am I correct in how you're wording that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, that is correct. I think the issue there today is while there's a green bike lane painted, it doesn't function as that because of the planters and the ramps and the other things are there. So in any decision that you would make to make this permanent, we would have pretty much a complete scrubbing of the traffic markings in that street to get rid of all of that. As we discuss the possibility of maybe putting a northbound and a southbound bike lane or walking past, there's just nothing that we saw in the activities of people that suggested those spaces would be honored in that way. And I think that picture is as much of a depiction of that as anything else.
Sure. And then just to follow up there. So with the sidewalks closed down, if you are walking and you are visually impaired, your regular dedicated walking space is no longer there. So you're into sort of this mixed use kind of free for all land. And that's probably part of some of the concern of getting buzzed is that, you know, you're in an area where it isn't necessarily designated for walking anymore.
Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton. Yeah, that's essentially what we heard. It's a very wide open space. And because of that, there aren't the same kind of building edges and other cues that a person walking, say, on a sidewalk space downtown would get. So it's almost like if you have 6 or 8 feet, there's some sideboards you can kind of find. If you've got 25 or 30 feet and it's wide open and random, that becomes a lot more complex. And the same is true at the street crossings. There's concern because the street crossings are so gradual that even with one row of truncated domes at the crossings, that people with vision disabilities who walk with a cane could miss those. And they ask for basically making them 4 feet deep instead of 2 feet deep. So I think you're getting at kind of the concerns over both confusion and safety in that environment that they expressed to us.
Great. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask that we be mindful of time. We've got 10 more minutes on this topic. And I know we're talking a lot about problems, but somewhere you've got solutions. And
Yes.
that's really what council would like to see.
So we came up with really 4 concepts for the street and its existing physical condition. And what I mean by that is there's still a preference that at some point 8th Street, if this is a permanent decision, be made to look like the Grove Plaza without curbs and without those cues. But also there's a concern, it's just been rebuilt 5 years ago, disruption to businesses. So concept 1 would essentially keep 8th Street in its closed situation today, closed to motor vehicles, but also keep a pedestrian access route along the sidewalk that would help address some of those confusion issues. Obviously, the cons of this are less space for the businesses to have that function. And if we only do something like a minimum access route like we show here, we observed people with guide dogs where the guide dogs saw this space as even too tight to allow their person to get through that area. And so while it's pros in keeping that space and reducing conflicts, if we just default to the minimums, we're still not getting at an ideal standpoint. Concept 2, if we just keep moving the patios out from the building, if you go out there today, you will find when the streetscape was done, there's a black strip of brick that we traditionally would call the furnishing zone. This is where your lamps, your trees, your bike racks are. And this concept would allow what some businesses have done and essentially come out to that line to utilize the sidewalk for their patio space. We heard stories of needing to access a broken sprinkler and a tree well under a forked dining table. There are tables that are overarching bike racks. And so this would allow all of that, clear the disruptions out of the street as much as possible. This tends to be, from our feedback, the most favorable option among the 50 or so stakeholders that we've discussed for this, just because it keeps the lampposts and other things there. Concept 3 would really allow full consumption of the sidewalk space out to the top of the curb. Again, some businesses have done this, but that is what ultimately pushes all the furnishings out to the street, as well as creates maintenance and access issues for that. So in talking to the DBA, they seem to believe that the majority of their businesses are okay with option 2, even though for some of them it would need to be moving it back, but they want permanence, so they know what they can invest in, and there seems to be a happy medium there for most of them. And then concept 4 would really be just to return it to its pre-COVID street configuration, essentially putting that out there. And the pros and cons are, I think, what you would expect them to be. It doesn't get at some of the goals and purposes of this discussion, but it would restore some of those function, connectivity, and accessibility things that existed prior to that decision. Street crossings, like I said, just quickly, the street crossings essentially become the crosswalks. So if you can just think about your progression, especially coming from the Grove, you're continuing to walk north in the street. And what we're trying to do is create a direct route with the red arrows, versus right now, especially a person with a vision disability would cross at the crosswalks and essentially run into a barricade at the end of the sidewalk dining and have to orient themselves to the middle of the street, where if the street was the crosswalk, they could be traveling in a straight line and get through there. And what this looks like from a technical standpoint, the yellow is where the truncated domes would go at the ends of the streets for the street crossings. The black lines would essentially be taking out the existing curb ramps that are there and building a vertical curb, so you would not be able to physically cross or ask to cross at where the existing crosswalks are. We would have crosswalks markings in the middle of the street. And from there, we would need to reconfigure other ramps, move pedestrian push buttons, and move pedestrian signal heads. This is pretty straightforward, and at least in a general sense, ACHD has bought into this. There are some challenges at the Bannock intersection, because that's where we transition back to the ramps that we will have to address in our detailed report. Finally, just the bicyclists and scooter users, there's a real safety concern among people with disabilities over this. And we have researched things related to either dismount zones or what we would call a slow zone that would set a speed limit of approximately 8 miles an hour. For this, we've looked at both signs and pavement markings that could be incorporated in this, as well as the digital driver feedback signs that you've seen on some ACHD routes, where you can program them with the messages like you see here, slow down and a frowny face. But that's definitely probably the biggest point of contention in our discussions, is trying to figure out that user conflict and user related issue for those. So like I said, we're here today to get feedback on a preferred direction. The concepts we've identified have a lot of similarities and generally have a cost estimate of around $600,000 or so. Those are just planning level. And certainly with direction today, we'll be working to put our concept report together, and then the city transition at some point soon into detailed design engineering.
Madam Mayor, thank you for, I know that so many people have done so much work, and I was on one of those earlier kind of walkabouts and kind of looking at what the possibilities were. It's come a long way since then. My question is related to the access ramps as they exist now. Is it envisioned that those would change in kind of the design phase, or would we still have those ramps that kind of come out into the street area?
The only way that those could truly go away would be a full rebuild to make it with no curbs like the Grove Plaza.
Okay.
Our recommendation would be come up with a wider version that's a little more nuanced and permanent looking. For example, if you go to Bitter Creek, there's a 4-foot wide ramp in front of an 8-foot wide opening, and the ramp leads you straight into a light pole. So let's make those ramps the width of the openings and at least do something like 6 feet to get at that. And then it's about finding other ways to make a prefab or other version that could be maybe more aesthetically pleasing.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Sean. I like option 2, where we go back to the black. Just FYI, if you're looking for that. My question about it, it looks like it would allow us then to keep the bikes on the black, bike parking on the black, and put everything and other furnishings, probably the planters as well, in between the bike racks, and keep most everything else out of the street itself. Would that allow us then to experiment with, I know there are some experimental ways to direct, especially vision impaired folks. Would it allow us, if we did that, to try to experiment with some of that as well?
Yeah, there's some emerging technologies. We've talked to vendors. I've got a call with a researcher based in Fairbanks, of all places, on Friday to talk about the use of what's called tactile strips. And without going into much detail, essentially, if you look at the bottom image here, say we scrub the street of the pavement markings, but if you take that first yellow line from inside the curb, essentially on both sides of 8th Street, you would line it with these tactile strips that a person with a vision disability would know that that's an edge. The area between that would be kept clear, and the things outside of that is where we could do lots of things. The buffer zone on top of the sidewalk, but even in that space roughly represented by the green, could put benches and flower pots and standardized restaurant signage and other things, but while keeping the rest of the space on that street clear. I think you bring up another good point. It gives you other options for placemaking, which I think is key to helping slow the bike traffic. From a bike parking standpoint, ironically, if you look in the first half block east and west of 8th Street, there's almost no bike parking in those areas, and we don't know the full reasons for that. However, if we think about this scenario where all of a sudden we don't have curb ramps on these corners, our ability to do more placemaking and features as well as bike parking within line of sight of the corridor without somebody who's destined for 8th Street having to penetrate that far on 8th Street to park their bike would help deal with the bike parking demand that's pretty significant down there.
Madam
Thank
Mayor.
you.
Yes.
I just want to echo what Council President Clegg said about the second option. I can see why businesses would want to keep concept 3 because they do have huge patios, but I feel like concept 2 really strikes a good balance between having nice patios and also creating space for the rest of the folks who will be using 8th Street as well. And I think that creating a more permanent solution for that would be, I think, preferable. I can also see and I think the slide says that it would limit or prohibit special events along 8th. It's kind of my understanding from this that you could kind of program 8th a little bit more because it's pretty clear in the center, and then fire access only needs a certain amount of space. So there would be a little bit of flexibility for that. So I am really excited that the orange barriers could be coming down. And I think that this would be a really nice use of the space, a nice way to maintain patios and maintain the vibrancy that's created on 8th Street in the activation, but still have some predictability for other folks using it.
Great. I see Jimmy and other feedback on 2.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I'm not necessarily tied to concept 2 over concept 1, and I can describe why. And I think there's probably ways to incorporate, one need versus the other. One of the worst parts about riding a bicycle down 8th Street currently is that the infrastructure changes every single block that you go down, which is really frustrating if you're riding a bicycle. Now, if you're somebody who's visually impaired, if you're somebody who has a disability, my concern about concept 2 is that same concept of riding a bike, except for now you're visually impaired. So you're actually going from block to block, and the treatment that you're walking down changes. And that can be very difficult and very, very confusing. So if we are going to be looking at concept 2, I really do think that we need to look at the treatment that's on the road, the surface that's on the road, and make sure that there is some consistency of what it feels like to be walking from one block to another. So there is less confusion of where am I actually supposed to be walking at this point. In concept number one, there's a little bit more of a traditional or obvious space where you would be doing that. There is some crowding, in between lampposts and bike parking and stuff like that. I think some of the bike parking and other clutter can be moved more towards the end. I just want to make sure that if we do this, that we're really going to do it right for all the different types of road users. And we are considering the folks with disabilities or who are visually impaired who might be getting a change in road treatment every single time they go from one block to the other. So that if we're looking at concept two, we're making those kind of investments. And then the last thing that I would just say, to echo again, I think a lot of that bike parking, I think the scooter parking absolutely needs to be moved out of that area. And I think that there's different ways to do that towards the end, or bike corrals or things like that. But if we weren't allowing any or as much parking in that area, then there would be a lot less clutter for folks who, are visually impaired or disabled.
Yeah, I think.
You've heard the feedback. We're
Okay.
over. So I'm going to see if any other council members have additional feedback on two, and then I'll trust that staff will be responsive in their designs. Council member? Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And now we are going to hear from Tim Keene, and I see Maureen Brewer here. And on planning development services and a housing update.
Okay.
Somebody just tell me what to add here. I'll start my slides. Oh, here you go. Is this it? Yeah, there we go. Got it. Good evening, everybody. Tim Keene, Director of Planning and Development Services. Thank you for giving me this time, and I'll presume you'll listen to what I have to say. The purpose of this presentation, really, for the most part, and the reason it was scheduled, was to allow me some time to speak with you about my initial impressions about the planning department and what we will need to do as a group this year in particular. So I'll start by saying that is how I've organized these slides, is to give you my first impressions and to talk about the direction that we'll be taking this year, as I'll be coming back to you as early as next week to talk about ways in which I feel like we need to be shifting the planning department, and that will translate into, even next week, the discussion, of course, will be fiscal year 23 funding. Patience will be helpful. I'm thinking about that this year, that we'll need to be patient as we seek to make change. As you know, the planning department at the city of Boise has been without a permanent director for quite some period of time. There's been a loss in some staff in planning in some important areas over the past 18 months to 2 years. The good news is we have a lot of talented people who are very dedicated public servants who I feel like simply need some help. And that's why I'm here, to provide direction and help them be successful. One of the great things about this group of people, I would say, is that they're open-minded and welcoming of change. There's a lot of what the planning department does that is very much about routine. And so to speak to people that live that environment about change can be scary, and that's understandable. However, I've been talking with our staff about this and have had so much support for not just change for change's sake, but changing such that we can do everything that we do better than anyone that does it. So we have a group that is welcoming of that. So I'm excited about it. So I'm going to go through some themes here as to what you'll be hearing a lot from me about this year. And the first one is just providing, these first couple are related to the day-to-day business of the planning department and the incredible interaction that we have with residents of this city on a day-to-day basis. And we have to be here for them, of course. And again, we have a group of staff that carries this every day. And wonderful people that feel this. You have seen an incredible increase, as you know, in construction in Boise over the past few years. This is a graph showing both the number of permits that are issued as well as the construction value. You see them going up. In 2021, the number of permits issued in the city was about 24,500, and the previous several years have been between 21,500 and 22,500. So we're up, and you see the big increase in construction value that's been permitted. And that, of course, has to do with the scale of what's happening, not just the number of permits, but the size of them. And that's represented on this chart. The thing we'll be doing this year is really investigating how our processes work so that we're concentrating on the customer experience. It is, of course, that we're processing this huge volume of permits, but more importantly, it's the experience one has when going through that process. And we have a very close relationship with residents of this city. If you're renovating your house, if you're putting a fence in your yard, if you're doing anything at your property, or you're a small business moving into an existing commercial space, you experience us. And so we want to be very particular about that experience. And again, the good news is we have people that love that and are good at it. The issue is we've got to really critique our processes and look at how we can be more consistent and predictable for people. And I've heard recently, and I mentioned this to the mayor earlier in the week, that I had a group of architects tell me that they would rather build in the city of Boise than any other city in the region in terms of how they're treated with respect and how open and accessible our staff is, which is wonderful. They were there to tell me about ways we could improve, by the way. So it was, you guys have great people and you're doing a good job relative to what's happening in the region, but here's some suggestions for how you could do better, which is what we want. And we'll absolutely engage the private sector in how do we improve our processes this year. One thing you'll hear from me soon is that we're going to get some help on this from a private company that does permitting work all over the country. And so they've experienced how cities and towns do this everywhere. We're going to engage them to come help us change our processes, because in the past where there's been discussion of process change, it's been left to those doing the work to make the change, which isn't really a reasonable approach because we're so busy processing the permit. So we're going to bring someone in to help us evaluate the process and then make the change so that in 2022, you'll see improvement. So you'll continue to reach out to me about people that are hung up in the permitting process, and that's just fine. I just want you to know that in the meantime, we've got this incredible focus on how do we actually improve it so you're not needing to call me. This is to get me out of the permitting business, essentially, is what this is all about. But anyway, that's going to be a real emphasis this year. A second piece, which is related, is how do we achieve the highest quality development out of the entitlement processes that we administer? So that, of course, includes the zoning process that the Planning and Zoning Commission is instrumental in, and City Council is. That includes our design review processes that include the historic districts, but also the areas that aren't in the historic districts. All the processes that we administer around enabling development to happen, that we're really concentrating on the quality of what gets through that process. And so a couple of things this year related to that. One is this is an area of planning where we're really concentrating on recruitment and retention of the talent that we have. The planning department has 114 positions within it. We have only 9 vacancies. The issue is 4 of them are in the areas that do this work. So that's devastating to that group. And we have, again, a group that's really carrying the load and not just in a, they're getting by kind of way, but they're doing a wonderful job. It's just they need help. And so we're really concentrating on this team to give us the ability to improve the processes. I have it here, zoning and design review process enhancements in 2022 that are concentrating on, yes, the speed of how people get through the process, but at least as importantly, the quality of what's coming through those processes as well. The next thing I'll mention is very much different in scale. And this is the work we have to do around with this community related to what is the city that we're actually seeking to build. And this gets to all the issues you hear about anytime you go to a public meeting, whether it's about zoning or anything else. People are just concerned about this growth that's come to Boise and what it's doing to the city, how it's changing the city, and a feeling that maybe we don't have any control over this situation. And this process I'm speaking to right now is the process to get us in control of this situation, which is to do something to be intentional about how growth shapes the city. I'm going to show a couple of charts here that kind of tell the whole story in a way. I'm showing Salt Lake City because it's nearby, but I could show you any city in America and you would see a similar pattern here, which is over the last generation of growth, the region grew tremendously and the city did not, in this case, much at all. So really all of the challenges that they have as a city and region are pretty much represented in this chart. The sprawling of the city into the region, what that's done to nature, what that's done to their ability to get around, transportation, the ways in which that's affected their housing market and their ability to really kind of function when it comes to zoning and enabling things like density are all represented in the last generation of growth. The city did not grow and the region did. So all these massive problems are represented in this chart. And again, I can show you one from every city and it will be very similar. We must avoid this. Here's Boise's chart, which isn't as dramatic as Salt Lake City's, but the region, it is similar in the sense the region growing at a rate that far exceeds that of the city, and the city's share of the regional population shrinking over time. And we have to deal with this. So the first part of the process will be answering the question, what size city are we designing for? And we will be engaging the community in a discussion related to this with help to look at the regional growth in the Boise region, what's projected, and doing some methodology around if the region is to grow to, I think the number is 1.2 million over the next 15 to 20 years, what optimally would be the city's population at that time, over that 15 to 20 year period? What size city are we designing for? How many people? And then optimally, how would that population be distributed around the city? What if it would be downtown? What if it would be in different areas of the city, along transit corridors? What are we seeking to build, essentially, in terms of a place for people? And then very importantly, too, it has to manifest itself in how the physical city changes to accommodate that growth, right? Because that's what we're really talking about when we're talking about planning, is the ways in which we are intentionally shaping the city physically to deal with this growth and how that affects mobility and housing affordability and protection and repair of nature. All these things are represented in how we then translate what is that optimal population into the physical city that we're seeking to build. So that is what this process will be about. And we have to catch up a little bit on this, because ideally this part of the process would be one where it's the first step. The second step is something like a comprehensive plan, and then the third step is kind of zoning. Well, we're halfway through a zoning process, more than halfway through a zoning process. So my urgency this year will be to have this part of the process catch up almost to the zoning part by the end of the calendar year. So there'll be a lot of discussion about this. But it will be very helpful because it will shift us from growth is negative. Everything I think about as it relates to growth seems to be something negative, like traffic or lack of housing affordability or nature gets destroyed, and shift us towards how can we grow faster to get to that city, because we will have defined what is that outcome we're seeking, right, in terms of the physical city. So this is an important endeavor for us this year. Then creating the regulations that enable this condition, and this is the process and essentially that you all have been participating in, and is the rewriting of the zoning ordinance, which is the foundational piece in terms of the regulations. And we are in the process of reevaluating where we left off with regard to the proposals we made on the zoning map of the city, and also the design standards. This is what was called modules 1 and 2 of the zoning rewrite process. So we have stepped back since those public meetings finished and are critiquing where we are and the direction we should be taking in response to what the community has been telling us and the challenges we know we have as a city. And we will present a revised set of recommendations related to modules 1 and 2 in response to that, and that'll be coming up very soon. We actually have a meeting of the citywide zoning advisory committee next week to start talking about this on Thursday next week. So then once we get through this process, and we'll have more public meetings related to the shifting that we're proposing to make, we'll then proceed on to module 3, which has to do with how we change our processes to help make what we want as a city easier to do. And so this will be a big continued effort this year. Further, the innovation that we make in housing in the city, of course, is a big emphasis of ours. I'll actually talk about housing at the end of this presentation as well, and come back to something I want to share with you. I've got a handout for you that I'll go through that relates to all the housing efforts and investments we're making right now. But before I get to that, just to mention, this will be a big year for pursuit of that housing strategy you've been discussing. And this has to do with the specific investments the city will be making through its funding and partnership with developers to build affordable housing in the city. But it will also have to do with other things that just have to do with enabling the private market to participate more easily in providing affordable housing. So whether it's the zoning ordinance work or other things we can do through codes to help people move faster when it comes to building affordably. You'll see some requests from me again next week when we get to budget that are related to this. But these are all of the things that we have in mind that we need to have as expectations as a city when it comes to the role of the planning department in housing and community development, specifically in pursuing this being a city for everyone. And so it has to do with the housing affordability piece, but it's more than that. You know, it's an affordable lifestyle. It's how you're able to live without a car, for instance, which helps tremendously. It's how do you have access to a better paying job, all these kinds of things. It's the diversity of people that we're planning for and designing for, and that we recognize that really when it comes to a successful city, we're along the full spectrum of income level. The mixing of uses, we need to demonstrate a commitment to that as we're asking private developers to do that. So as we're, for instance, using city property in pursuit of affordable housing, that we're seeking to achieve all these things and demonstrate through the city's assets how you do this better than any other city, including energy conservation and water conservation, energy efficiency, water conservation, beautiful design, construction techniques, pushing on that. How through opening up other construction techniques can we make housing more affordable, and then financing mechanisms such that we're pushing to wherever possible. And this is tough, but you know, we need to be thinking about this creative financing around achieving more affordable housing. Let's see, why is it doing that? Here we go. I'm going to transition from there into the planning departments. You just finished this conversation about 8th Street, and I can tell you with great certainty, you need a planning department that is better able to to lead on the public realm of this city, the public spaces of this city. This has much to do with our success as a city. And as in this process that we'll go through related to the growth of the city and its design, a key piece of that will be how we're designing the city relative to mobility, and pathways will be central to that. Really, again, back to, if we are to avoid the mistakes of every other city in the country, then we'll need to really design our growth around more and more people's ability to drive less. It's not that people won't drive, they will, of course, but that people can drive half as much as they do now. We will be successful then, which means we have to design around. And the thing about that is, the only reason there are people, of course, that don't have a choice, that don't have a car or don't have the means to drive all the time. And so they're relying on transit, for instance, to get around. There is much of us that does have choices. And for those that do, the quality of the public spaces are the difference between choosing to or not walk, ride your bike, or use transit. And we have to get so good at this. Like, mediocrity isn't okay when it comes to this in a growing city. So we have to organize ourselves to do this well. And I'll get to how we propose to do that in a minute, but it relates very much to ensuring that we have safe mobility options throughout the city. And again, there's a relationship here between the quality of these spaces, but that they are available to everyone. This isn't simply a downtown issue. This is a citywide issue, one that touches every neighborhood and every section of the city. A couple of examples of two very different environments. On the left, this is on the bench, and then on the right, of course, downtown. The point, though, just is that we have to start, and you'll see this, again, patience. You'll see some changes that we're proposing in terms of our kind of transportation team at the city. We have a transportation team within the planning department that's in the planning area, but really shifting the focus of that group to be related to mobility and public spaces, and which will mean that there may be some things that we do right now that don't have a big impact that maybe we just need to stop doing, and other things that we're not doing at all that we need to really concentrate on, and perhaps other talents and things that we need within that team. But you'll see this year a lot of emphasis on building that team into something that's really capable of the scale of design and concern the city needs to have related to these public spaces. So that is the conclusion of that kind of department-wide presentation for me. I'm going to shift to a deeper discussion about housing, but maybe before I do that, should I take questions, do you think, Mayor, on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you, Tim. I don't think I had ever really thought about the zoning code rewrite quite in that way. Like, okay, let's actually envision the city that Boise will become, including how many people will live here, and then write a zoning code that kind of underpins that. I think that's a really innovative way of looking at it. One thing you said in that discussion was, traditionally, you would envision, figure out how many people, how much population Boise will have in the future, and then develop a comprehensive plan, and then a zoning code that supports that comprehensive plan. We're a little bit out of order in those steps. So my question is, we developed a comprehensive plan back during the last recession, or the one before last. Do you think that that comprehensive plan has enough in it to get us to where we need to be? Or do you think that it's insufficient in its vision for the future of Boise?
Councilmember Woodings, what I was envisioning here is that we use Blueprint Boise as the base for this work. And then we take the work that's been done since Blueprint Boise. So there's various plans, including pathways, which I showed here, but all of the plans that have been done in Boise since Blueprint Boise, and we use those as the basis for this design. I think that much of it is there. So all we'll be doing is clarifying and basically getting into the specific matter of how the city physically, what Blueprint Boise and those plans are representing in terms of the city's physical growth. I think most of it will come from that work that's already been done. One piece that won't, of course, is this answering this question, what size city are we designing for? So we do have to do that, and we will begin that very soon. And so we'll be able to, once we have engaged a group to help us with it, we'll be able to talk publicly more about it. But that's a piece that's missing. The remainder of it, I think, is mostly there, and we'll be able to just work with that. That's my hope. Mhm.
Madam Mayor. Tim, thank you so much. This has been really helpful for me, and I'll echo what Councilmember Whitting said about that bigger picture, which is like, what size city are we designing for? I want to ask you, shouldn't we also consider what size region we're designing for? Because that was really stark when you looked at the numbers in Salt Lake, but the whole region has exploded, and yet Salt Lake is the hub of that valley. So walk me through that.
Yes, Councilmember Willits, and I've said purposefully that we will use the regional numbers in order to come to our number in terms of what size city are we designing for. So we will be basing all of this work on the region's projections and in the context of the region. So I suspect that from this work, it will lead to other questions regionally as to maybe we'll be asking questions that haven't been asked before that will warrant more regional discussion. But I'll assure you that anything that we're doing relative to Boise is going to be in the context of what the regional growth is projected to be.
Mayor, thanks, Tim. I won't take a long time because I really want to get into the housing, but first of all, just thank you for speaking this language. It's a language I've been digging into for almost 30 years and really appreciate it. My question, as you begin to envision what optimal city we might want to become, will you identify specific strategies within that, say, focusing on redeveloping and infill on our commercial corridors, what role annexation and greenfield development might have? I'm assuming that you'll outline each of those and the piece that they might have in that future. Is that correct?
That's correct. And really, I think back to Councilmember Wooding's point, I think a lot of that is actually in these plans. It's just that they haven't, like the critical pivotal issues haven't been elevated where they need to be, and this will do that. I'm going to hand out something real quick for this next. I wanted to present this to you tonight. This relates to the housing strategy for the city. Mostly because we're going to be, coming to you on a regular basis as it relates to the action that the mayor and council are seeking on housing affordability. So there's going to be various other individual presentations to you in the coming months related to action on these items. So that's one thing. A second thing is I wanted to prepare something where everything kind of on the table is in one place. So you don't have multiple conversations where you feel like, how does this relate to that? And this kind of thing, that everything that will be coming to you related to, as it has to do with city funding and support, would be represented in one place. And that's what this is about, is to do that. So a few things I want to mention before I go through these slides. One is the date on the top of it. It's May 17th. Of course, this says draft, but this is something I would imagine that we will be presenting to you again periodically. So you could see this 3-6 months from now and updates to this. So think of this as an ongoing piece of information that you can always refer back to and say, how did we get off course on this, or what happened, as it relates to any of these investments that we're going to be seeking from you. The second thing I'll point out is the years here, 2022 through 2026. So this is a multi-year kind of thinking here, which you've been doing yourself, but I just want to make note of that because this is talking about an investment strategy, but it's not tied to an individual budget cycle, like one fiscal year. This is looking at, hey, over a longer period of time, what are we expecting the overall investment will be, and how are we funding that, and how are we acting on it? So just this issue of this is multiple years here. So anyway, I'll go through these slides here. So the first thing is these goals, and you've seen these for the most part before in one form or another. Again, so we'll have them all in one place, but the 2,500 homes here, the permanent supportive housing units, the new affordable homes, the preservation of homes, these are numbers that you've seen before. I don't need to belabor this. The strategy, optimizing city-owned land, again, you've been discussing this. For people that need it most, this is a great opportunity. All the things I was speaking to in the earlier presentation relate to the expectations the city has for the degree to which it will seek to do the most exceptional kind of work in this realm on city-owned property. And then seeking developer partners that are committed to the same goals. Again, not just the housing affordability piece, that's what drives this, of course, but all of the pieces of it. It's how are we changing the city in the process of doing this? How are we changing neighborhoods, streets, what it's like to live in the city? And we've got great developers here that are interested in this, and we need to seek those that are seeking to do it best. And then the other piece is investing in the supportive services needed to help people in the process of their trying to be successful in the city. And I'll speak to that in this next slide here, which gets to the overall cost. And these might be numbers that you haven't necessarily seen. And I think the main reason for that is that they haven't necessarily been presented in one place, perhaps. But what you're shown here is in pursuit of this, these goals, and using this strategy, we've got a series of costs here that I'm calling hard costs that have to do with the production or preservation of a house for people. So whether it's permanent supportive housing or our ability to either ourselves or with others produce new housing units, or all the efforts around preserving housing units, all those hard costs are here. So you have actually seen these numbers in one form or another, the 75 million. What I've added
Tim,
here.
just to be clear, just
Absolutely.
so that I'm clear,
Mhm.
this includes, so in the total, say, of 88.5, or looking at the hard costs, is it, when I look at the top line with the funding, it's not all City of Boise funds, it's
is not all.
aggregating
That's
others
correct.
and pointing out that we expect and will
That-
need philanthropy and then additional partners to meet this?
That's correct,
Okay.
Mayor. This is the overall budget, not just the City of Boise's. This is ours. This is federal funding. This is other private, partners in this process. So this is the full budget. Thank you for pointing that out. And then there's the soft costs associated with it. You'll be hearing from us next week about some additional funding for Our Path Home on an ongoing basis. So additional support to Our Path Home. And then I've included in here what the city will need to come to terms with, which is the costs associated with supportive services for permanent supportive housing. And you've had these discussions before in the context of an individual project, or you've also had it in the context of what's the long-term solution to this issue. I'm including in this the long-term solution to this issue, which would be the $7.5 million investment in the city, seeking to achieve an equal amount through philanthropy, such that we would come to an investment fund of $15 million that would be dedicated to support services for permanent supportive housing. I don't have all the solutions for you tonight. What I'm doing is presenting, this is the collection of things that we'll need to do this year as it relates to all the efforts around housing. So the next one has to do with the sources of funding. And this, again, this shows you City of Boise General Fund. Again, this is not simply the hard cost, this includes the soft cost. So included in this number here would be the additional funding over that 4-year period, 2022 to 2026, for our path home. That would include this issue of the supportive services for permanent supportive housing. So again, showing everything in one place, this is the kind of challenge that we have as a city here. The existing federal programs, home, that is, one-time federal, philanthropy is in here at half of that investment funds at 7.5 million, and remaining to be identified is the 15.6. And I will say that has a lot to do with the preservation of housing units, and identifying additional funding for that. And the discussions, for instance, that we're having with the housing authority about deeper partnership with them around preserving existing units. So there is work to be done here. However, when you look at sequencing and the projects that have been identified or either are through the process with City Council or that we're anticipating over the next few years, the amount here is, when you looked at the sources of funds and the sequencing, what's been identified so far as needing funding, they're about the same amount. The source of funds is to date 72.9 million. This number is at 72 million. This is something that we will, again, you will see a lot in terms of, as things progress along the way, how the sequencing is working for whether it's a city parcel that we're working on, whether it's a developer partnership that we come to that is building affordable housing. This would be an important way to keep track of what's happening. On here includes some things that you've acted on recently and are projects that are in motion right now, notably State and Arthur, as well as Moda Franklin. And then action in 2022, importantly, again, additional funding. This has to do with the general fund and the general fund programmed dollars. This doesn't mean spending $9.9 million this year. This means this is funding that will be in addition to what had already been discussed in terms of general funds for production of homes. That will be spent over a period of years. Then action on city-owned land, the city-owned properties that are in the works right now. There'll be action on various city properties during this current year. We have a partnership with the Housing Authority that will be coming to you, we believe, strongly in June, which has to do with commitment related to rental assistance, which is so important. So this MOU will be coming to you. The Permanent Supportive Housing Investment Fund, again, we've included it in here as a total of $15 million, with the city contributing $7.5 million. More discussion of that this year and a decision on how to move forward. Otherwise, you continue to have this kind of annual discussion about the cost for those services. And then, as I said, we'll be coming to you, and I'll discuss this next week, with some additional funding for our path home. So that's the action in 2022 as it relates to this. So with that, I'll conclude and answer any questions or take any suggestions or comments you have on that. And Maureen's here as well, of course. Maureen Brewer is here to help answer questions.
Great. Thank you, Tim. I love having this on one piece of paper where we can see everything that's going on all together in a comprehensive way. I have a million questions, but I'm only going to ask one right now. And that's on the services for permanent supportive housing side. So I don't know if Maureen's going to want to address this or not. There's been some talk about Medicaid funding potentially to provide those services. And I just wanted to see where we are on that conversation.
Mayor, Council Pro Tem Weddings, happy to answer that question. So Medicaid is very much still a part of this equation, and we're continuing to work through a Medicaid crosswalk with the Corporation for Supportive Housing, Idaho Housing and Finance Association, and of course, working closely with the Department of Health and Welfare. So right now that crosswalk is looking at what is currently in the state Medicaid plan. Is there a delta between what's in that plan and what providers understand that they can bill for? And then is there a delta, and we know there to be one, a difference between what they can bill for now and what they should be able to bill for to provide the tenancy supports that we need to stand up supportive services for PSH. So that's very much still part of the long-term game. There will always be a need for a sustainable fund source outside of Medicaid. We also don't want to be delayed in bringing on the 250 units of PSH while we sort of navigate those political waters with the state.
Great. So it's there's kind of a dual track going on here. Like we need to do this now as well as continuing to pursue this other track for kind of longer term sustainable funding.
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem Weddings, that's correct, because to move forward on the 250 units of PSH, we need three things. One is to secure the financing to construct the projects. Two, we need a rental assistance commitment. And three, we need a supportive services fund source.
Great. And I'm just gonna real quick get on my soapbox really quick about how the Ada County is the indigent services provider designated by the state of Idaho for our residents and should be the ones who are engaging in this work and should be the ones who are providing funding for residents who need indigent services. Am I still correct in that assumption?
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem Weddings, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is we are looking to work with Ada County specifically on one PSH project that will have more of a treatment focus that better aligns with sort of the philosophy, if you will, of the current commissioners.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And I just want to highlight what Maureen said before handing it over to the council president. To end or prevent homelessness, which everyone in this city and state says they want to see us do, we need partnership with the state. We need partnership with the county. We need funding sources of Medicaid and others. And so it's really important. We have said we are committed to bringing these solutions to scale because we can do something as a city that others haven't because of where we're at right now. It's a commitment of this council. It's a deep commitment of mine. And what we need is partners that are pointing fingers on these topics to actually work alongside us. And I gotta say, it was super frustrating to be in front of HUD to share with them what this council had said, yes, we will do with these goals when I was back in DC in March, and to hear that there's money that they've allocated for permanent supportive housing for other things in the recovery dollars that are sitting at the state. And so I really appreciate how productively Maureen and our team is working to move some of these projects forward, but we've got to see those that profess to be deeply disturbed by the issues and want to see us be successful to help us when they have sources of funding that we can't access without them.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks for saying that. I was going to share that same story, and I appreciate it. So to that end, and kind of following up on this, it looks to me, first of all, like the big lift is in the next 2 years, trying to figure out these anticipated agreements and the partnerships we're going to need to get there. And then maybe more importantly, the kinds of partnerships we're going to need to really identify a sustainable source of support for the services that we know that the permanent supportive housing needs. I think it would be helpful. This is enormously helpful. And like Councilmember Woodings, I thank you for putting it all on one sheet. The next thing I would like to see is a breakdown in the $46.5 million that's identified as City of Boise general funding, the opportunities that are sitting on the table, not being tapped because our partners haven't stepped up, and what a difference that could make for this region, for the citizens who live in our city, and for the overall reach of this housing strategy in order to get to the full 75 million. And again, like I said earlier on another topic, the more transparent we can make this for people in the city about what the money is that we're committing, what money other people could commit that they're not, what money's lying on the table not being used, I think the more likely we're going to be able to build the support we need to get those partnerships in place. Having said that, I'm in support, even though it's a change in strategy of moving forward with what we need to do immediately so that we can get started on this. And recognizing that, in fact, when we started on this road, we said, we'll do the capital. We'll put together the deals. We'll find the financing stack. We'll put together the management. You guys pick up the services. And then some of our partners backed out on that. It's so important to me right now to get this in place that I'm willing to go that next step, but it doesn't mean that we should forever say the city of Boise should be on the hook for all of that. And I think the way we're going to get there is to make it very explicit and very intentional what things we're doing, what partnerships we should be getting, what things are on the table that frankly haven't coalesced for us because the partners haven't come on board.
Well, and one thing I'll just say on that is that we've asked staff to put together the plan that reaches our goal of ending homelessness, preventing homelessness, housing Boiseans. And I didn't want us to see a plan that, took what we had and would do what we could do with what we had, but instead that we see a plan that does what we have to do to meet the goals that council has said is the goal of the city. And so that was our intent with this. And I think what you're asking for is a follow on to that. So to be clear, as we go through this, that these are the different steps and tactics we've got to implement. We can do, this is what we're able to do with our commitment. This is the hole that we seek to fill in partnership.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Anything else? I want to thank you both for being back here tonight with this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I move we go into executive session, personnel, land acquisition records exempt from public disclosure, pending probable litigation, communicate with risk management regarding pending probable claims, and labor contract, Idaho Code 742061 1B C D F I N J.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Sanchez,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thanks. We will be back here at 6. Thanks, everybody.